If someone gave you absolute power and promised you could save everyone you love, would you take it? A man who watched his closest friends die in the Battle of the Somme wrote the most important book about power ever written, and it's disguised as a story about elves. Every scandal you're watching right now, he predicted in 1954. In the year 1954, a Catholic professor who survived the Battle of the Somme wrote a book publishers thought was too weird, too long, and completely unmarketable. It became the best-selling novel of the 20th century and invented an entire genre. Here's the secret Amazon couldn't buy. When John Ronald Reuel Tolkien returned from the Battle of the Somme. In 1916, he was suffering from trench fever and had watched most of his closest friends perish in the mud. The Battle of the Somme was one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Over 1 million men were wounded or lost. Tolkien served as a signals officer, crawling through trenches filled with fallen soldiers, breathing poison gas, watching friends disappear into artillery fire. 2 members of his closest childhood circle, the Tea Club and Barovian Society, passed away within months. Geoffrey Smith was struck down by shrapnel. Robert Gilson was struck down by machine weapon fire. The war didn't just haunt Tolkien, it transformed him. Years later, he would write that the marshes of the fallen in The Lord of the Rings, where bodies lie preserved in stagnant water, their faces staring up through the murk, came directly from his memories of the battlefield. In a hospital bed in England, barely 24 years old, he began writing The Book of Lost Tales, the beginning of a mythology that would take him his entire life to complete. He wasn't writing escapist fantasy to forget the war. He was forging a new kind of story, one that understood loss, sacrifice, and the corruption of power, because he had witnessed these forces destroy his generation. Today, we're drowning in fantasy content. Every streaming service has a billion-dollar fantasy show, but most of them fail because they miss what Tolkien actually did. He didn't just create a cool world with magic systems. He understood something about human nature that resonates, whether you're in 1916 or 2026. Tolkien was an unusual candidate for literary celebrity. He was a philologist, a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford University, a man who spent his days studying ancient languages and medieval manuscripts. He had a passion for Finnish grammar, Norse mythology, and Beowulf. He was conservative, Catholic, smoked a pipe, wore tweed jackets, and preferred pubs to parties. His great love was inventing languages, something he had been doing since childhood. By the time he started writing what would become The Lord of the Rings, he had already constructed multiple Elvish languages with complete grammatical systems. The Lord of the Rings began as a sequel to The Hobbit, which Tolkien had published in 1937 as a children's book about a homebody hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, who goes on an adventure and finds a magic ring. The publisher wanted more hobbits, more adventures, something light and commercial. But Tolkien couldn't write a simple sequel. The ring that Bilbo had found kept growing darker in his imagination. What if it wasn't just a magic trinket? What if it was the most dangerous object in the world? For 17 years, from 1937 to 1954, Tolkien worked on The Lord of the Rings. He wrote by hand, in barely legible script, constantly revising, rewriting, throwing away entire chapters. At one point, Tolkien threw an entire draft into the fire. His wife pulled it out. That version, the one he almost burned, contained the Council of Elrond. He drew maps, created genealogies, invented calendars, designed alphabets. His publisher grew frustrated with the delays. His friends wondered if he would ever finish. Even Tolkien himself doubted the book would ever see publication. He called it his private amusement and worried that readers would find it absurd, too long, too strange, too unlike anything else in modern literature. When The Fellowship of the Ring was finally published in 1954, followed by The Two Towers and the return of the king in 1955, something extraordinary happened. Despite minimal advertising and skeptical reviewers, the books became an underground sensation. Students at universities passed copies around. Word spread. Within a decade, The Lord of the Rings had sold millions of copies and transformed Tolkien from an obscure academic into one of the most famous writers in the world. The timing mattered. Post-World War II readers were hungry for stories about hope surviving in darkness, about ordinary people facing impossible odds, about friendship and sacrifice, defeating tyranny. Tolkien had given them exactly that, wrapped in a package of elves, dwarves, wizards, and a ring of power that corrupted anyone who wore it. And he had taken fantasy, a genre dismissed as children's entertainment, and shown it could carry the weight of serious literature. In 2026, when social media tells us we're powerless, when politics feels broken, when global problems seem unsolvable, Tolkien's message hits differently. The smallest person can change everything, not by seizing power, but by refusing to use it. That's not a fantasy trope. That's the choice we face every day. At Oxford, Tolkien was part of an informal writing group called the Inklings, which met regularly at a pub called the Eagle and Child. The group included C.S. Lewis, who would write the Chronicles of Narnia, and Charles Williams, a novelist and poet. They would read their work aloud, offering criticism and encouragement over beer and tobacco. Lewis was one of the first people to hear chapters from The Lord of the Rings, and he immediately recognized its brilliance. The friendship between Tolkien and Lewis was intense and complicated. Two devout Christians who disagreed about almost everything except the power of myth and story. Lewis wrote quickly and prolifically. Tolkien wrote slowly, agonizingly, perfectionism slowing every sentence. But both men believed that fantasy could reveal truth in ways that realism could not. Most writers create characters first, then build a world around them. Tolkien did the opposite. He invented entire languages, then created a world that needed those languages to exist, and only then did he populate it with hobbits, elves, and wizards. He wasn't just writing a story, he was constructing a linguistic universe. Tolkien once said, "The invention of languages is the foundation. The stories were made rather to provide a world for the languages than the reverse." This is an extraordinary admission. Imagine spending decades creating languages that no one speaks, then writing a 1,000-page novel just so those languages have a context to exist in. This wasn't typical writer behavior. This was an obsession operating at the level of genius. The two main Elvish languages, Quenya and Sindarin, have complete grammatical structures. Quenya was influenced by Finnish, with its flowing vowels and elegant sound. Sindarin drew from Welsh, with its complex consonant clusters. He wrote poetry in these languages. He designed scripts for them, including the flowing Tengwa alphabet and the angular Kurth runes. This linguistic foundation gave Middle-earth something that other fantasy worlds lacked: depth. When you read about the elves of Rivendell speaking in Sindarin, or when you see inscriptions in dwarvish runes on the doors of Moria, you're experiencing a world that feels lived in, ancient, real. Tolkien created thousands of years of history for Middle-earth. The events of The Lord of the Rings take place in the Third Age, but he had already written the stories of the First and Second Ages, tales of gods and heroes, the creation of the world, the forging of the rings of power, and the fall of entire civilizations. The ring at the center of the story is the One Ring, forged by the Dark Lord Sauron in the fires of Mount Doom to control all the other rings of power. The One Ring is not just powerful, it is corrupting. Anyone who wears it is slowly consumed by it, twisted into a servant of Sauron's will. The ring is absolute power, and Tolkien's message is clear. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the only way to defeat it is to destroy it completely. To reject power rather than try to use it for good. Think about every scandal you've seen, every leader who started with good intentions and ended up corrupted, every tech billionaire who promised to connect the world and ended up controlling it, every politician who vowed to fight the system and became the system. Tolkien understood something we're watching play out in real time. Power doesn't corrupt bad people. It corrupts good people who think they'll use it for good. That's what makes it terrifying. The world building extended into every detail of daily life in Middle-earth. Tolkien knew what hobbits ate for breakfast, how long it took to travel from the Shire to Rivendell, the types of trees that grew in different regions, the poems and songs that characters sang around campfires. This wasn't background decoration. It was the texture of reality, and it made readers believe in a world that never existed. This obsessive attention to detail would establish the template for modern fantasy. After Tolkien, fantasy writers understood that world-building mattered, that creating a believable secondary world required thinking through its languages, geography, history, and culture. Tolkien didn't just write a great story. He invented the rules for how fantasy worlds should work, and every fantasy writer since has either followed those rules or deliberately broken them, while acknowledging his influence. At the center of Tolkien's epic is the smallest, most unlikely hero in fantasy literature, Frodo Baggins, a 3.5-foot hobbit who loves comfort, second breakfast, and smoking pipeweed. He is asked to walk into a volcano in the most evil place in the world and destroy the most powerful weapon ever created. And he can't do it alone. The Fellowship of the Ring is the story of how that fellowship is formed and why it matters. Frodo inherits the One Ring from his uncle Bilbo, who found it decades earlier and kept it secret, not realizing what it truly was. When the wizard Gandalf discovers the ring's identity, he tells Frodo the terrible truth. Sauron, the Dark Lord, is searching for it, and if he finds it, he will enslave all of Middle-earth. The ring cannot be used. It cannot be hidden. It must be destroyed in the fires of Mount Doom, deep in the heart of Mordor, Sauron's stronghold. Frodo is a reluctant hero. He doesn't want this burden. He wishes the ring had never come to him. Gandalf tells him something crucial. So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. This line captures the essence of Tolkien's philosophy. We don't choose the crises we face, but we do choose how we respond to them. At the Council of Elrond, the wisest leaders of Middle-earth debate what to do with the ring. Some want to use it against Sauron. Others want to hide it. But Elrond explains why both options fail. The ring corrupts anyone who tries to use it, and it cannot be hidden forever. The only solution is destruction. When the council asks who will carry the ring into Mordor, Frodo volunteers. He is the least likely hero, and that is precisely why he might succeed. Great warriors would be tempted by the ring's power. Frodo is too small to wield that kind of power, and that is his strength. The fellowship that forms around Frodo represents all the free peoples of Middle-earth united against darkness. Gandalf the wizard guides them. Aragorn, the hidden heir to the throne of Gondor, leads them through the wilderness. Boromir, a warrior from Gondor, represents human ambition and weakness. Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf overcome ancient enmity between their peoples to become friends. And Frodo's companions, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, 3 hobbits from the Shire, prove that loyalty and courage matter more than size or strength. The journey of the Fellowship takes them through some of the most memorable locations in fantasy literature. They travel through the peaceful Shire, where hobbits live in comfort, oblivious to the darkness gathering in the world. They are hunted by the Nazgul, the 9 ringwraiths, former kings corrupted by Sauron's power and transformed into servants who have passed beyond. They find refuge in Rivendell, the last homely house, where elves preserve beauty and wisdom in a world growing darker. They attempt to cross the treacherous misty mountains through the pass of Caradhras, but are forced to detour through the mines of Moria, an ancient dwarven kingdom now fallen into ruin and darkness. Moria is where the Fellowship faces its first devastating loss. In the depths of the mine, they are attacked by orcs and a Balrog, an ancient demon of fire and shadow. Gandalf faces the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, preventing it from following the Fellowship. He breaks the bridge, sending the Balrog falling into the abyss. But the demon's whip catches Gandalf's ankle and drags him down with it. His last words are, "Fly, you fools!" Frodo screams in anguish as Gandalf disappears into darkness. The Fellowship has lost its guide, its protector, its anchor. The loss of Gandalf devastates the Fellowship and nearly breaks them. They flee to Lothlorien, an elven forest ruled by Galadriel, one of the oldest and most powerful elves in Middle-earth. There, the Fellowship recovers and prepares for the next stage of their journey. Galadriel offers Frodo a vision of the future, showing him the consequences of failure and success. She is tested when Frodo offers her the ring, and she admits the temptation to take it is overwhelming. "In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen," she says, imagining herself wielding ultimate power. "Beautiful and terrible as the dawn. All shall love me and despair." But she refuses. She passes the test, proving that even the greatest can resist corruption if they choose to. After leaving Lothlorien, the Fellowship travels down the River Anduin toward Mordor. But Boromir, tormented by his desire to save his people and tempted by the ring's power, tries to take the ring from Frodo by force. The Fellowship is breaking. Frodo realizes that the ring's corrupting influence will eventually destroy the entire group, and he decides to continue the journey alone. But Sam, his loyal gardener and friend, refuses to let him go by himself. "I made a promise, Mr. Frodo," Sam says. "A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to." The Fellowship of the Ring ends with the group scattered. Frodo and Sam head toward Mordor alone. Merry and Pippin are captured by orcs. Boromir falls defending the hobbits, redeeming himself with a heroic final stand. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli set off to rescue Merry and Pippin. The Fellowship has broken, but the quest continues, and the reader is left desperate to know what happens next. Take a moment to drop a comment below. What's your favorite moment from the Fellowship of the Ring? And don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves Tolkien's world. Tolkien didn't believe in villains who were evil just because. Sauron, the Dark Lord, was once a servant of the gods, beautiful and wise, before power corrupted him absolutely. Gollum was a hobbit-like creature named Smeagol, before the ring transformed him into a tragic monster over 500 years. Boromir is a good man who falls to temptation but passes away trying to atone. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien explores a terrifying question. Can anyone resist the lure of absolute power? The One Ring doesn't just grant power. It feeds on ambition, pride, and desire. It whispers to its bearer, promising them the ability to accomplish their greatest goals, if only they will claim it. Boromir wants to save his city, Gondor, from Sauron's armies, and the ring tells him he could do that if he took it. Galadriel wants to preserve the beauty of Lothlorien, and the ring offers her the power to protect her realm forever. Even Gandalf refuses to touch the ring, knowing that he would try to use it for good and would be corrupted in the process. The brilliance of Tolkien's ring is that it shows how power corrupts through our virtues, not just our vices. The ring doesn't tempt Boromir by promising him wealth or pleasure. It tempts him by offering him the ability to save his people. That is far more dangerous. The message is clear. Power concentrated in one person, no matter how noble their intentions, leads to tyranny. This is why the hobbits are the heroes of the story. They are overlooked, underestimated, small in a world of warriors, wizards, and kings. They don't hunger for glory or power. They want good food, comfortable homes, and time with friends. Frodo carries the ring not because he is strong enough to resist it, but because he is humble enough to recognize its danger. Sam's loyalty to Frodo is the purest form of heroism in the book, entirely selfless, motivated by love and friendship rather than duty or destiny. The Shire has gardens and a second breakfast. Mordor is factories and ash. When Saruman cuts down ancient forests to fuel his war machine, Tolkien isn't being subtle. He grew up watching England's forests disappear, replaced by factories and sprawl. He saw technology used for destruction in 2 world wars. He's asking a question we're still arguing about. What are we willing to sacrifice for power and progress? Tolkien wrote this in 1954. 70 years later, we're still debating the same thing. Do we sacrifice beauty and community for profit? The Shire versus Mordor isn't ancient history. It's your hometown. It's the question of whether we build a world worth living in, or just a world that's efficient and profitable. The character of Gollum embodies the ring's ultimate corruption. He was once Smeagol, a creature similar to a hobbit, living with his family by a river. When his friend Déagol found the ring, Smeagol took his life and claimed it. The ring extended Smeagol's life for centuries, but twisted him into Gollum, a wretched, paranoid creature obsessed with my precious, as he calls the ring. Gollum is pitiable and dangerous, a warning of what Frodo could become if he keeps the ring too long. But Tolkien gives Gollum depth and tragedy. He is not just a monster. He is a victim of the ring's power, and moments of his original personality, Smeagol, still flicker through occasionally. The literary establishment initially dismissed The Lord of the Rings. Edmund Wilson, one of the most influential critics of the mid-20th century, wrote a savage review in 1956 titled, "Ooh, those awful orcs." He called the book juvenile trash and couldn't understand why adults were reading it. Other critics complained that fantasy was inherently inferior to realist literature, that stories about wizards and dragons couldn't address serious themes. But readers disagreed. They found in Tolkien's work the emotional depth, moral complexity, and imaginative scope that realist fiction often lacked. Over time, critical opinion shifted. Scholars began analyzing The Lord of the Rings with the same seriousness they applied to canonical literature. They recognized Tolkien's achievement. He had taken fantasy, a genre dismissed as childish, and shown it could carry profound themes and complex characters. He had proven that stories about imaginary worlds could be as meaningful as stories about the real world, that myth and fantasy could illuminate truth in ways that realism could not. If you've made it this far, you're clearly a fan of deep literary analysis. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep exploring the greatest books ever written together. When Gandalf falls into the abyss of Moria, Frodo screams in anguish, and the Fellowship is shattered. It's one of the most devastating moments in fantasy literature, not because of its violence, but because Tolkien makes us feel the weight of loss. This is why the Fellowship of the Ring endures. It treats fantasy with the emotional seriousness of great literature, proving that stories about wizards and elves can break your heart just as powerfully as any realist novel. The final stand of Boromir at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring is equally powerful. Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo, driven by desperation to save his city. But when orcs attack, Boromir defends Merry and Pippin with his life, taking arrow after arrow, fighting until he can no longer stand. Aragorn finds him passing away, and Boromir confesses his betrayal and begs forgiveness. "I tried to take the ring from Frodo," he says. "I am sorry. I have failed." Aragorn replies, "No, you have conquered. Few have gained such a victory." Boromir passes away redeemed, his last act one of heroism. This scene demonstrates Tolkien's understanding of human weakness and the possibility of redemption. Sam's loyalty to Frodo is the emotional heart of the story. Sam is a gardener, a working-class hobbit without education or status, but he possesses a quality that none of the great warriors and wizards can match: unwavering loyalty and love for his friend. When Frodo tries to leave without him, Sam nearly drowns trying to follow him into the river, unable to swim, but refusing to let Frodo go alone. "I made a promise," he cries. This moment shows that heroism is not about strength or destiny. It is about keeping your promises, standing by your friends, and doing what is right, even when it costs you everything. Tolkien's war experience infused the story with genuine tragedy and understanding of loss. The Marshes of the Fallen, where Frodo and Sam see the faces of lost soldiers staring up through stagnant water, come directly from Tolkien's memories of the Somme. The camaraderie of the Fellowship reflects the bonds Tolkien formed with his fellow soldiers in the trenches. The sense of a world in decline, of beauty and wisdom fading from the world, mirrors the feeling of Tolkien's generation, who saw their entire world destroyed by the Great War. But Tolkien's book is not nihilistic or despairing. Despite the darkness, despite the losses, despite the overwhelming odds, the Fellowship of the Ring is ultimately a story of hope. Gandalf tells Frodo, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. This is the core message. Ordinary people, working together, can stand against evil. Great powers may clash, but the fate of the world rests on the choices of a hobbit gardener and his master. The Lord of the Rings transformed fantasy from a niche genre into a cultural phenomenon. Before Tolkien, fantasy was considered children's entertainment, fairy tales and adventure stories without literary merit. After Tolkien, fantasy became a legitimate genre capable of addressing profound themes. His influence is impossible to overstate. Dungeons & Dragons, the role-playing game that defined gaming culture, was directly inspired by Tolkien's work. Nearly every fantasy novel published since 1954 owes a debt to Middle-earth. Authors from Ursula K. Le Guin to George R.R. Martin to N.K. Jemisin have built their careers in a genre that Tolkien essentially created. The cultural impact extended far beyond literature. The Lord of the Rings influenced music, with bands from Led Zeppelin to Rush, writing songs inspired by Middle-earth. It influenced visual art, with countless artists creating paintings and illustrations of Tolkien's world. It influenced film, culminating in Peter Jackson's Oscar-winning trilogy in the early 2000s, which introduced Tolkien's work to a new generation and proved that fantasy could be a cinematic spectacle without sacrificing emotional depth. The book ends with the Fellowship broken, its members scattered across Middle-earth, facing separate dangers and uncertain fates. Frodo and Sam have crossed into enemy territory, walking toward the fires of Mount Doom with no guarantee they will survive. Merry and Pippin are prisoners of orcs, being dragged toward an unknown fate. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have set off in pursuit, 3 against an army. Gandalf is gone, fallen into darkness. The quest seems hopeless, but that is the point. Hope persists, even when circumstances are darkest. The Fellowship may be broken, but its purpose remains. Each member will face their own trials, and through their individual journeys, they will discover strengths they did not know they possessed. Frodo will carry the ring to the edge of destruction. Sam will carry Frodo when the burden becomes too great. Aragorn will claim his destiny as king. Merry and Pippin will inspire a forest to go to war. And Gandalf, though fallen, will return transformed. Sam, a gardener with no training, no destiny, no special powers, carries his friend up a mountain when Frodo can't take another step. That's the moment Amazon's billion-dollar show couldn't be bought. That's why 70 years later, Tolkien still wins. You're not Aragorn, the hidden king. You're not Gandalf, the powerful wizard. You're Sam. You're Frodo. You're the person who wakes up, goes to work, takes care of people you love, and wonders if anything you do matters. Tolkien spent 17 years writing 1,000 pages to tell you it does. The smallest person can change the course of the future. Not someday. Today. Right now. When the fellowship breaks and hope seems lost, love is stronger than any ring of power. That's not fantasy. That's the only truth that matters. If this exploration of Tolkien's masterpiece moved you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss our deep dives into the greatest books ever written. Hit that like button to help others discover these stories. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep discovering the power of great literature. Until next time.